Dark Souls Trilogy on the ROG Ally, Dark Souls Remastered, Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, and Dark Souls 3. I also own Prepare to Die Edition. The first Dark Souls PC port is no longer available for purchase, so I'll ignore it. Dark Souls 2 also has two versions. I'm using the latest one, Scholar of the First Sin, that has some changes. So let's get started right away. First of all, Dark Souls Remastered. I'm not doing the Prepare to Die edition, that is the original PC port, because it's not a great PC port, first of all, and second of all, it's no longer for sale. So 1080p, 120Hz. Make sure you have 120, despite the game being locked to 60 because VSync. 120, making sure that you have it enabled in Armory Crate as well. We'll make sure that you're using VRR, but we're going to talk about that in a second. We're using 18 watts because using anything more is kind of a waste, in my opinion, in a game like this, and you get the best battery life. So let's unplug the charger while looking into the distance. But as you can see, even at 18 watts, we're holding 60s. But I have a surprise for you guys. So Armory Crate just got an update that added a new design and a few new features, and now we got actually the AFMF thing from AMD. So going to the Armory Crate menu, hit AFMF, which is frame generation from the driver level, and as you can see, the real frame rate is 60, but with frame generation we get double the frame rate, so 120, and the game does look smoother because it's doing double the frame rate by faking one frame, and it does look good. The thing is, you get a bit of latency, but at a base of 60 FPS, it actually looks pretty good. It does look smoother, so that's pretty good if you're into that sort of thing. Again, completely optional. But at 18 watts you get basically 1.5 hours of battery, basically. Which, I mean, for a ROG Ally, it's okay. I mean, it's a good battery life by ROG Ally standards. Yeah, imagine that. So Dark Souls 1, completely fine. You can do 120. If there is quick camera movement, it will go back to 60, but it's usually okay. As you can see, looking into the distance drops us to 58 sometimes. But again, we're good to go. Completely smooth. In some boss fights, it's going to increase the GPU usage, especially the ones that have fur, like the big dog that you fight, forgot its name. So yeah, frame generation is optional, but it works pretty well. Looks pretty smooth. Since the basic frame rate is basically 60, and you cannot go higher, so without affecting... Ooh, I died. So without affecting the game's logic, we are basically running at 120, which again, as a base, it's 60. That's why 120, in this case, frame gen is recommended if you want to be closer to the screen's refresh rate. So yeah. Dark Souls 1 works pretty well. The remaster. The Prepare to Die edition, if you own it, you probably know that you need mods to make it run properly. But Dark Souls 1 is fine. The remastered version, of course. And you can optionally, as I said, 120 using frame generation. Now we're checking out Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. This is the second version of the game, that is DX11. Yeah, DX11. And, well, everything on the highest, 1080p. And as I told you on the previous game, I recommend either 18 watts or 20. We don't even need to be plugged into the wall. The idea is to maximize battery life, so... yeah, I mean, this area... This is another game that is locked to 60, by the way. We're going to try frame generation in a moment. But it's a very easy to run game. Runs at 60 just fine. 18 watts, so we maximize battery life. And let me go somewhere else. This area isn't as demanding, so 1 sec. Alright, we're in the Black Gulch, and this is one of the most literally toxic areas of the game. This is where I dropped frames back then. Oh god. I freaking hate this part. But as you can see, with the amount of transparency, it's usually dropped for me. So yeah, it's pretty easy to see why it can drop frames. So far so good though. Of course, depending on the boss fights and all that. Man, I haven't played this game in a while. So why am I going to this boss that I'm completely going to lose against? Despite being, at least when I played this game, I found it very easy. Well, because I usually drop frames due to the fire on screen and all that, but it seems to be completely fine, even at 18 watts. So this should mean 90 minutes of battery. But before I unplug the charger, there we go, I died. Alright, so with AFMF enabled, 18 watts, we're at basically 59 FPS, unplayable. And, oh, we should be at 120 Hz. I screwed up there. Hold up. So go to the quick menu and select 120. Otherwise, you're going to have screen tearing. And since we died there... So at the top right corner, you'll see the frame rate with frame generation on, and at the left, the real frame rate. So we're getting 59, 60 over here. But in reality, we are doing frame generation, targeting 120. And while it does look smoother, I feel a little bit of latency with the controls, which is to be expected, I mean frame generation, but with the minimum at 60, it actually feels pretty good. Again, just make sure that, again, this is at 120, AFMF on. You can also do, what's the name of this? 20 watts if you want a slightly more stable frame rate. But it works pretty well. And the screen tearing, I think is missing, not sure. But if you move the camera super quickly, you'll notice that the frame gen is going to turn off momentarily. That's normal behavior. Happens on very specific motions on screen, to say it in some way. So we should be good. And this should give you 90 minutes of battery, which again, for the ROG Ally, is good battery life. Yeah, that's how bad battery life is on this device. So, Dark Souls 2 works just fine. Lock it to... okay. If you want 120, frame generation is the only way, because the game is locked to 60, like every other From Software game. And well, what to say? It works just fine. I would personally just play it at 60, it's okay. Frame gen, I mean, in a game like this, where you usually have to have some precision, I like having the normal 60 FPS. But it's a nice to have. If you want the game to look smoother, well, there you go. From a driver level, you get 120. Oh, dang it. Well within the VRR window, so that's a good option. And finally, Dark Souls 3, 900p, locked in, 30 watts. These are the settings. I just disable motion blur because personal preference. Then when it comes to here, 30 watts, make sure it's at 120 Hz. AFMF, I don't know why it's on. I didn't want to keep it on. Well, this one is way more demanding than 1 and 2. And I'm in one of those toxic locations again. because it can drop pretty badly in some of this. There's another... Well, people told me that the DLC in some parts is super demanding, but I don't own the DLC, so apologies. And I'm recommending 900p due to the fact that we're in the VRR window, so we're between 48 and 120, so we should be good. We should be within that window. Again, this one is 30 watts, so you should be plugged into the wall if you're using this mode, which, I mean, the battery will last less than an hour if you're playing like this on the go. Maybe you're using a power bank, well, that might be a good option. I'm going to show you another area, of course. This is just to show the start here, despite the amount of effects, the foliage, all that. As you can see, we stay into the 50s, again, within the VRR window, so that's okay. Okay, so the area that we're at right now has way more stuff into the distance. As you can see, we drop into the 50s here. It's more of a CPU limited location, unfortunately. But hey, as you can see, completely fine. We drop to 48 when running in here. And again, 48 is the bottom part of the VRR window, so no screen sharing. Make sure, again, that in here you're set to 120. Otherwise, VRR will not work. And once you get in here, again, a lot of geometry. We are basically CPU limited. CPU limited in a way that it's a game issue. It's not that the CPU is maxed out. Sometimes this happens. But I wanted to show you two areas where that happens, just because of the fact that you're probably going to run into this. It's a very big game. And at least there is where I noticed the FPS drops. But 900p seems to be, when it comes to performance, the best of both worlds. You get a pretty good pixel count, looks better than 720. On the smaller screen is super crisp. The UI, while it's small, you can actually get away with it, in my opinion. If you don't like this, put it at 720, which we're going to do in a moment. And you can also optionally enable frame generation, and you'll be into the 100 and something FPS, but you get a bit of latency, so up to you at that point. Alright, so I unplugged the charger, and we're now at 720. On the advanced settings is the same as before. And well, back to the toxic swamp. As you can see, we are at 20 watts at least, into the 50s, some drops into the 40s, no, not a huge deal, at least here. There's an enemy over there. Whoops. And here, when the enemy attacks us with those transparencies, we get drops into the 40s at times. Points. Yeah, there we go. With those effects on screen, it kind of makes sense. Still, it's a big difference with plugged in play for some reason. Not sure what's going on here. So maybe it's a bug with the game, because I don't usually run into this type of issue. Overall, still running fine, but we'll see once we get into the city that I showed you before. Alright, so the geometry heavy part, we drop into the 40s actually. But again, we're at 20 watts, as you can see here, manually at 20 watts, but if we're still at 20 watts, as you can see. Everything is the same, but now we jump into the upper 50s, basically 60 FPS, so it's completely fixed. So same wattage, the only difference is we're plugged in. So I'm not sure what's going on. This is the first time that I see this issue. And well, it seems to be a game specific issue maybe, I don't know. So if we're not playing plugged in, expect very degraded performance despite being at the same wattage. Again, this is the first time this happened to me on the ROG Ally. Not sure on what's going on. Because again, the CPU performance values are exactly the same. I quadruple checked it, and we still have this issue. So even if you have a power bank, you might want to plug this thing in, put it at 18 or 20 watts, and you still have good performance. Without being plugged in, for some reason this particular game has very degraded performance, despite being at the same wattage. On the other games, like Dark Souls 1 and 2, we're fine. But this one is different, so keep that in mind if you're going to play Dark Souls 3 on the Ally. Maybe, again, it's a bug on my end, who knows. I rebooted the Ally a few times and it still happened. So this doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah, again, we're plugging it in. Same wattage. Instead of the 40s, we're into the 60s, completely fine. But at 20 watts, so I don't know, man. Otherwise, the Trilogy is completely fine without taking into account this issue, which is pretty damn weird. Let me know if you run into the same issue on your ROG Ally. I will be interested to know. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did taking a look at the Dark Souls Trilogy on the ROG Ally. Too bad about the issue on Dark Souls 3. Hopefully it's just a myth thing. And I'll see ya next time. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.